Good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to start now. Thank you, everyone, for attending this panel. The panel name is Harnessing the Value of Digital Infrastructure and Artificial Intelligence, Accelerating Development Finance and Digital Transformation. So I will be moderating the panel. I have a bit of expertise in digital transformation, so I work for an organization that is managed by the multilateral development banks, and we are developing a software, a public good for governments. And what we have identified in order to be able to work with governments is that we need to make sure that governments can have first the digital infrastructure in order to be able to benefit at some point from AI. I can see that on the board of my board, I have some MDBs around the table. So the discussion is going to be with different type of questions, and we're going to have also a running order with 2 keynote to start with, and then a panel conversation. So first I would like to invite Professor Mariana Mazzucato, professor at University College London, where she is founding director of the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose.
Great. There?
Please, yes, just there. Thank you.
This was going to be a nice, small, intimate discussion, so surprised we were so far apart, but thanks so much for coming. And I really just want to give some opening, I guess, provocative points around how to think about some of these issues as an economist. And the reason I actually founded this institute at University College London was I think we're actually really stuck in a reactive space in terms of how we think about the role of policy in different areas, whether it's the ecological transition or AI, and that's because at best, at worst, government get out of the way. At worst, the doji or doggy, I'm not sure how to pronounce Elon Musk's craze, but at best, the problem is at best, we end up with fixing market failures. So by design, we're patching things up. Instead, what this whole issue needs, which is, how do we actually govern AI in the public interest, how do we have good public-private partnerships, really needs a different framework. I don't have time to talk about the details, but instead of market fixing, we need to actively shape and create markets to be inclusive and sustainable. And that really requires a pre-distributive understanding of how to get good public, private, and citizen partnerships. And what's interesting, of course, with technology is, in fact, that's where the technology came from in the first place. When I wrote The Entrepreneurial State, back in 2013, I looked at the history of Silicon Valley, which was not just, publicly funded research, later commercialized through venture capital, so on and so forth. We literally would not have any of the smart products inside our smartphones. They would be stupid, idiotic phones if we didn't actually have these publicly financed technologies, often done through active strategic uses of tools like procurement, government purchasing, so the internet, touchscreen, Siri, GPS, all actually came from public resources. And yet we didn't actually think about the design of those technologies ex ante. And if you think about the big discussions today around big tech, a lot of the kind of fixing the mess post facto, I think, comes from the fact that in the innovation process itself, which is collective public and private investments went into those technologies, including in LLMs today, which literally would not exist without DARPA more than 20 years ago having funded the computer language development. I think this first issue I wanted to mention is, wouldn't it be good if, at least in the future, we learn a bit from those mistakes where we don't just fund technological innovation, we don't just obsess today about AI, but actually govern the production, the innovation ex ante with these concepts of the public good and common interest at the center. And second, if we don't do that, we end up with what some colleagues and I have called recently algorithmic rents. The fact that we actually have today dominant tech platforms, which are, in the words of Adam Smith, not Karl Marx, doing a lot of rent seeking is part of the problem. Again, we don't tackle monopolies ex post. We need to actually think about how the design of the algorithms themselves by actually manipulating, in many cases, attention rents is something we both should have thought about from the beginning, but also should be confronting today. Adam Smith, by the way, when he talked about the free market, he didn't talk about free from the state. He talked about free from rents. And if we think about today how increasingly we will be required to pay for access to essential information, payment for data privacy, payment for safety, payment to avoid advertising, payment as a business to be included in the global information search, it's almost like there's a troll underneath a bridge that is constantly asking for these different types of fees. So really the notion of antitrust really needs to increasingly be thought about, again, ex ante. Shoshana Zuboff wrote a great book called Surveillance Capitalism, and she kind of sums up this problem as, you think you're searching Google for free, well, guess what? Google is searching you for free. The third point is there's actually really interesting seeds of this idea, I think, of thinking differently. If we look at how the CHIPS Act under the Biden administration was designed by the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, instead of just saying we need chip sovereignty and it becoming a nationalistic idea, she said, let's make sure that we design this ex ante in a way that also helps us steer, okay, the chips sovereignty in a way that also helps us reach other goals we have in the economy. Right? Market shaping, not market fixing. So they put into the CHIPS Act, we actually worked with them to do this 2.5 years ago, so much has happened since then, conditionality, reciprocity, symbiosis between public and private actors. So those semiconductor companies in the US who were going to benefit, still not clear exactly what's happening with chips today, under Trump, from this public program had to commit to 3 things. Reinvest your profits, right? The profits that are being generated from this massive collective investment, don't just use it for share buybacks to boost stock prices, stock options, and executive pay. Reinvest in, again, something that Adam Smith and the classical economists really cared about. Second, improve working conditions and worker pay of the people working in these enterprises. And third, use energy-efficient supply chains. So the whole ecological transition, the climate goals that we have that we talk about at COP are not just for the ministries of the environment, they really should be at the center of how we actually steer economies, even if not especially in how we think about tech. And you all know more than I do what's happening today with data centers having to be cooled down by lots of water, scarce water that many people around the world don't even have to drink. Apparently every time you write an email with ChatGPT, you actually use a 500 milliliter bottle of water. And so that CHIPS Act is interesting as another interesting example of a better designed public-private partnership ex ante, so we don't get stuck regulating ex post, is what happened in COVID. You know, what was the goal in COVID? Was it just to have a bunch of vaccines, or was it global vaccination? Of course it was the latter. And only one of the vaccines, the AstraZeneca Oxford one, was actually created ex ante with that goal in mind. There was conditionality in terms of knowledge sharing, keeping costs and prices low, so access, issues around access. And the other vaccines didn't do that. So really, you know, given what the goals are in the economy, how do we then design and innovate and produce collective intelligence around artificial intelligence that ex ante has these notions of the public good and public interest? And all of this, of course, is only possible, this is my last point, if we actually invest within the brains of local, regional, national governments. And unfortunately, what this Doge Elon Musk craze is about is really just a theatrical version of what's been already happening for the last 40 years. A recent book I wrote called The Big Con is how consulting has infantilized our governments, weakened our businesses, and warped our economies. So instead of outsourcing tech to Deloitte, which by the way was outsourced 1.5 million a day during COVID by the UK government for test and trace and failed miserably, we need to be insourcing this ability to govern, to bring in computer hackers, as the mayor of Barcelona did when she was thinking about the data commons at the city level. Make it super cool for the geeks to work in government, because it ends up being where we think strategically around these issues. And I think the Eurostack initiative right now in Europe, which is really trying to think about not just digital sovereignty as this kind of nationalistic at the regional level exercise, but really bringing back these notions of the public interest and public good and how we govern ex ante and ex post our digital futures. We really need to make this one of the most exciting questions of our time for young graduates who want to be, creating value in a different way. And I think another example of this in the UK, for example, was GDS, Government Digital Services, where a team actually from the iPlayer, the BBC iPlayer team, came into the Cabinet Office and thought hard. What does it mean to actually start thinking of citizens, not as clients and customers, this kind of new public management, public choice theory view of people from the government side, but as users with human rights, who we actually really enhance and nurture their well-being and how they access a digital platform, whether they're getting their voting application or their driver's license or passport. So it's again, not this abstract view of the public interest and public good, but literally at the relational, experiential view, and we really need to change not just that public-private dimension I talked about, but also the citizen, government, and business interaction. And I'll just stop with that, but I just wanted to raise these issues, because if we don't, I think we just get stuck in this completely, I was going to say a terrible word, but what should I say, boring narrative of, socialist Europe or socialist this and free market US. And I think some of the most interesting places where these questions are being asked actually are in Africa. You know that Rwanda has some of the most interesting things happening today around digital government. We were speaking yesterday with the president's team here in South Africa around how the G20 moment should really be a solutions moment, an implementation moment of putting some of these big global goals at the center of government that has to be done by building capacity. And I just came from Rio 2 weeks ago, where we just worked with the government, especially the public administration ministry, around how do we, if we actually think about the goals at the center of government, use them to review, revise, reorient, reimagine all the different tools we have to create markets, from public sector procurement, digital governance, and, for example, state-owned enterprises, who we all know are often part of the problem and not the solution. So that need to redesign, and I just don't think it's going to happen unless we literally make it extremely interesting and cool to work inside our public administrations, to be asking and being part of the conversation that we'll be talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's an amazing way to start the discussion. And it's true that one thing that we should all be aware, and I'm sure I hope you are, is that if it's free, you're the product. And I think sometimes people are going to say, yeah, but I don't mind that the tech companies can take my data, but are you willing to give up your phone and your computer unlocked to a complete stranger? So I think those are the questions that are good to answer. I'm going to invite now the Ambassador David Martinon, French Ambassador to South Africa and the former French Ambassador for Digital Affairs. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for convening this event. Full disclosure, this speech has been produced by ChatGPT. And the question I asked was, tell me about you and make it long, boring, and confusing. Thank you very much, Professor Mazzucato, for your indeed incredibly free speech, extremely inspirational, and I would love to continue that conversation with you. So I would like to start with 4 facts. First, as President Macron stressed at the AI Action Summit in Paris 2 weeks ago, we live indeed in a time of acceleration. Fast technical developments in the field of AI mean we face an acceleration in the public choices we have to make and the investments we have to initiate. Second, threats and opportunities brought by AI affect regions and societies differently, depending on the structure of their economy. Harnessing the power of AI for the common good will require to work together. And I think by saying that, I am trying to be consistent with what you said. together across various countries with various stakeholders involved. All of us have a shared responsibility. And so our compass should be twofold: acting fast to identify and support AI use cases that will benefit the common good and build the infrastructure necessary to deploy them, while taking the time to analyze the risks for societies, as mitigating them will require long-term mutual efforts across all areas of international cooperation. So I would like to stress some of the main issues raised where there is more to imagine and to do in international cooperation. First of all, infrastructures and energy. AI may seem virtual for end users, but just like human beings, it needs a skeleton. In the continuity of digital transformation at even greater scale, AI requires heavy investments in infrastructures, increased connectivity to democratize access, high-speed networks to enable new use cases, and indeed data centers to offer local computing power and data sovereignty. In South Africa and across the continent, solutions are being developed with local partners to increase and improve access to digital infrastructures. I would like to mention French companies, for example, which are among world leaders in fiber connectivity and undersea cables, like Orange Marine, or like Alcatel Submarine Networks, and also in connectivity by satellite with notably Eutelsat. I would like also to mention the investment that was made by the French Development Bank, AFD, 288 million euros between 2021 and 23 in Africa on broadband expansion or on the construction of data centers, including a project of low-emission data centers with the World Bank in DRC, in Nigeria, and in South Africa. So this point of energy consumption that Professor Mazzucato mentioned, by the way, is crucial. As AI drives a growing demand of materials and energy, risks are indeed high of competition in markets where access to energy is still fragile or insufficient. But we believe the just energy transition, for which we are deeply involved, notably here in South Africa, and the AI revolution can go hand in hand, provided we invest in the positive use case and work on mitigating the risks. Just 3 ideas. We believe AI can improve capacities of climate science. We believe IT has the potential to improve grid management and optimize energy efficiency in markets with fast-growing renewable capacities. And we believe avoiding to deepen inequalities on energy access will require to work on frugal infrastructures and low-resource AI models. That is why at the AI Action Summit in Paris, France launched an international coalition on sustainable AI. And we believe this framework will be able to nourish our collective works on the development of AI, including the promising task force on AI for sustainable development that the South African presidency of the G20 has defined for this coming year of presidency. Building quality infrastructures in a sustainable way will require to go further in developing funding models that de-risk investment in AI in emerging markets. Talents and workforce. Obviously, the AI transformation is not only about tech, but also about people. It is necessary to train and to upskill at large scale. And maybe the revolution of artificial intelligence should be first and foremost a revolution of human intelligence. A country's capacity to take the driver's seat in AI development will depend in large part on its capacity to create a local pool of talents with high-level skills in several areas of AI development. South Africa, for example, is an example of an emerging market with excellency in AI research, both fundamental and applied, and in advanced tech and entrepreneurs skills. We French are proud to see the French South African Technological Institute, which is hosted at by the Tshwane Institute of Technology, becoming a leading hub for research in applied AI. And I would like also to mention Wits University, with world-class expertise in AI, that just opened its Institute on Human and Machine Intelligence, called MIND, or the University of Cape Town and its new AI initiative. I would also like to mention plenty of promising startups on AI applied to different industries, some of them among the continent leaders, and which are here in South Africa. Clevia, Data Prophet, or Xeneo in fintech and business operations. iRobotics for drone and satellite data management. Zindi and Special Edge, that, by the way, we had the pleasure to see speak at the summit in Paris. And obviously, very ambitious strategies of South African banks and telecom companies to make the most of AI for their markets, which is obviously inspiring for the continent and beyond in terms of applied AI. Beyond the topic of the specific skills required to develop AI applications, the impact of AI in the workforce will be massive, with the risk of widening or creating inequalities in the workforce. In Africa, for instance, obviously the exact impact of AI is still being debated. There is no absolute certainty. It will potentially destabilize mainly populations with less formal skills, namely here women or low-educated individuals, but actually that's not absolutely sure. But sufficient levels of digital literacy will prove critical to help mitigate risks linked to the manipulation of information, which is an important topic for all democracies worldwide. Third topic, AI applications and models. So the digital revolution was about making large-scale customization of products possible. AI models will succeed in changing our world for the better only if apps built on top of them are relevant and tailored for their context. Once upskilled, local entrepreneurs and researchers will be able to provide the best solution to local problems: agriculture, energy, education, fintech, insurance, for example. That's why investment and cooperation with promising entrepreneurs, as well as working on more inclusive innovation ecosystems, is key. And yes, I do acknowledge the fact that I'm talking as a representative of a government. That's what we're aiming at. And that's what we're trying to do, notably the French embassies around the world, working with funds like Digital Africa to invest in the kind of startups that has the kind of high potential that the development of AI absolutely requires. It is important to note that access to technology and its relevance to solve local problems are improved when underlying models reflect the diversity of cultures and societies. And indeed, multilingualism, yes, I managed to say it, and I can tell you for a non-native, that's not an easy word. I'll say it again, multilingualism. Am I right? I feel like a world champion. Well, this word, it's a major stake in African context. Throughout the continent, initiatives are ensuring that tools can be developed in local languages. And that's, of course, a challenge we particularly know here in South Africa. Sharing resources in common is also important to build applications adapted to the various contexts of human societies. Open source models, open data, and shared computing capacities are crucial leverages of inclusive AI developments. This is why at the AI Action Summit in Paris 2 weeks ago, a foundation called Current.ai was precisely established to democratize access to key building bricks of AI technologies. And by saying that, Professor Mazzucato, I have in mind what you said about the fact that big companies can very quickly become rent seekers, and that our job as a government is to make sure that competition survives. And yes, I do remember that when Professor Hayek won the Nobel Prize in Economy in '74, he won it with Gunnar Myrdal, who was describing the market as something that every company, every economic agent will try to capture. So we have to keep that in mind at all time and make sure that any economic actor can actually access the kind of tools that would allow him to enter that particular market. And now policy and governance. Stakes are as massive for the future of our economies, will require both global coordination and locally crafted answers. And I would just like to talk about including global governance, which is indeed necessary to better understand and mitigate the risks faced by societies and to coordinate efforts and investments in AI for the common good. This, again, was for us the meaning of the AI Action Summit that gave birth to a statement on inclusive and sustainable artificial intelligence for people and the planet. And indeed, we also welcome and we will actively take part in the exchange of best practices taking place during the South African presidency of the G20 that made of AI one of its priority areas. Dear colleagues, the development of AI may appear as the moonshot of our time, a breakthrough milestone that redefines the scope of possibilities and changes geopolitical lines. And yet, we must be absolutely clear on the fact that we are just only witnessing the beginning of the AI revolution. But of course, as every revolution, and in France we love them, a revolution is only what we collectively make of it. And so we believe that the best path ahead is to deepen common action. So thank you again for convening this panel. It's just the beginning of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we're going to be able to continue, and something that I liked about that is going to follow on the discussion is the backbone. And the backbone is important. And in terms of backbone, before talking about AI, and this we're going to get to it, but the backbone is necessary. And when we talk about, that's why digital infrastructure is mentioned. But just as for the audience, the definition of digital infrastructure refers to the foundational technologies and systems like internet, networks, data centers, cloud platforms, and softwares that enable the storage, processing, and sharing of digital information. It's the backbone that powers everything from basic connectivity to advanced tools like AI. So that I think is important to see that we need that before also looking at AI, and that's why also it's good to see everything that has been developed in South Africa. So I'm going to start now with the panelists, so we can also get now the experts' feedback also. So today we have on the panel Tomoyuki Kimura, the special senior advisor to the president at the Asian Development Bank, Thomas Melonio, chief economist at AFD, Hoon Kim, acting vice president at AIIB, Igor Skarsia, industrial development expert at UNIDO, and Joshua Wycliffe, CEO of the International Solar Alliance. The first question that I'd like to ask the panelists is, what does AI mean to you, and what do you expect from it? So I will go, and my eyes are going to Hoon. So Hoon, can you start? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't expect that I'll be the first one, but I'm happy to do so. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a development banker, and let me start by confirming what our keynote speakers have already said. And also you said, AI and digital infrastructure are deeply interconnected, and you already mentioned that we must recognize the sequence of their development. So AI cannot be meaningfully deployed unless the foundational digital infrastructure is already in place. In other words, we all know that you cannot run AI models where there is no broadband, I would say no digital ID, or even no interoperable payment system. So this brings to development bankers three major challenges, maybe known to you also. First, building the core digital infrastructure. So most developing countries in Africa also, they lack, you mentioned backbone, basic connectivity, cloud computing, and national ID system. And without this, AI will just remain as an abstract concept rather than a transformative tool. So solution, so as a development bank, public development bank, and multilateral development bank, we must prioritize investment in foundational digital infrastructure as a prerequisite for AI adoption. And the next one is, we are in AIB, we are talking about developing AI-enabled infrastructure, high-quality infrastructure. So the AI can enhance the infrastructure existing traditional infrastructure. But I mean, these are still very early stage, and many governments is not yet in a position to focus on this and lack the expertise to deploy them effectively. So there is a role for MDBs, and we must fund pilot programs, and we should also fund regulatory sandboxes and also knowledge sharing platforms, so to help our countries experiment with the new framework and also scale up their use of AI. And my last point is, this is fundamentally most important point. We must prevent AI-driven digital divide. Already there is a digital divide in terms of digital infrastructure. Now, AI is doubling, tripling, multiplying it, because countries now lagging in AI adoption because of lacking digital infrastructure. Now they are facing the risk of falling further behind in global economy. And as I mentioned, AI requires a lot of infrastructure requirements. So MDBs here is another role to play, must provide options, concessional financing, training, policy, technical assistance, whatever it is. So there's a lot of work to do. It's a good news and also is a bad news. Thank you.
Thank you, Hun. Igor?
I will answer straight to the question about what is basically for us as UNIDO, artificial intelligence and digital infrastructure. At UNIDO, basically we see artificial intelligence merely as a tool to accelerate economic transformation. It's a tool that, if properly and effectively utilized and nurtured, can in fact accelerate the objective and the mandate of the organization in supporting industrialization. Now, the challenge in that, and then maybe I will explain later a little bit the example of intervention of UNIDO in this field, there is also the other side of the coin of risking to accentuate the divide between industrialized and industrialization economies. Economies that are at the forefront of the technological development may benefit from an accelerated growth as a result of artificial intelligence, but at the cost of developing nations that instead, not having necessary infrastructure in place, might actually fill this gap and fall behind into a direction that we all have been trying to work on in this field. Maybe I'll stop here, when later on there will be space for more example, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. Thomas?
Well, thank you so much. Mariana and David Martino have said everything, so let me say the rest. You know, just a year ago, I would have thought that this panel may have been entirely pointless, in the sense that if LLM were a 15 billion investment game, there would have been no space for Europe, no space for Latin America, no space for Africa, And now with what DeepSeek or Mistral in France have managed to do, it's a different discussion. It could have been a game with super high concentration, super high rent seeking, as Mariana was saying it, but now it might be a slightly different game. And it's a matter of hope. And David Martineau has spoken about the Paris Summit. Now we're observing a possibility that AI might be more decentralized, with probably a little bit less rent-seeking. There will be rent-seeking for sure, but it's a different game if for a few millions or dozens of millions, there's a possibility to develop a model and probably add up layers of AI on models that are cheaper. Hence the discussion now that's moving with the interest of not being only consumers, whether in Europe, Africa, Latin America, and the rest of Asia, but the possibility to develop useful products based on free or cheap models to adapt for needs that exist on our continent. Maybe a few examples. David has spoken about multilingualism, for example. We know that it's a big stake here in the continent, but also elsewhere. And it raises questions such as, is there a certified and quality content in local or national languages and not only in French, English, or other languages? And that may be a work for development banks, for development agencies, to provide, typically in education and health, contents in local languages that is certified, that is quality content, and not everything that you can find on the internet, because that would be a big problem if you give advice on health based on fake news, fake data, fake content. That's one possibility. Recently with a cohort, we published a study on the potential of AI, and I was surprised by the very strong importance of talent. When you look at the determinants of AI investment, it's a statistical work, I was surprised by the importance of talent. And again, it means that here in South Africa, but elsewhere, investing in young people able to work on AI actually matters. And it's not only because these persons are going to move to the Silicon Valley or to Peking or Beijing. They might find jobs and very in a role in their societies based on their talents. Again, it's a very strong message that each and every country could invest in talent for AI, and not just to build the consumers for tomorrow, but it's really producers that needs to be decentralized as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Joshua?
Thank you. From ISA's point of view, the development finance segment has clearly entered the artificial intelligence phase of the digital infrastructure marathon. And for us, this journey, as we see from external organizations, have been at different stages for different organizations of the digitalization curve, and the organization's pursuit of excellence and progress squarely depends at where and which stage of AI deployment they are in. Of course, our stance is in the emergence of AI is to we see AI as something that's set to disrupt the whole physics of the development finance business. And that has opened the era of major innovations and, of course, new operating models for development finance. For instance, this morning I was speaking to a gentleman from one of the large FIs, finance institutions, and I was talking about various geographies that we have, and I asked him about a particular geography and what projects they were doing. His response was that geography was closed as far as they were concerned, and that was because of major debts and non-payments and the risk that were associated with non-payments. Immediately my head went to this space, and I thought predictive modeling from AI, and if it were those days of lending available, would have predicted the behavior and also would have taken away the risk in lending to some of these markets, or at least put in some mitigative measures. So it was a key, and for us at ISA, where we have blended finance models towards de-risking lending, towards providing things like first loss benefits, insurance premium losses towards major renewal projects. We see AI as the way forward, and not just predicting, but also providing support our member countries in being able to support their journey in just transition as well. So in this day and age, when blended finance is expected to provide a big breakthrough for all markets, especially Africa, we see AI as a major de-risking for de-risk financing as well. And so it certainly sounds promising. It is beginning to reshape capital markets. And of course, like I said, reimagining risk management. And I could go on and on, including, I think I heard someone talk about group procurement, collective joint procurement, so scaling up of economies. AI predicts and provides the best intelligence in the market for procurement as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomo.
Thank you. I joined ADB about 25 years ago. At that time, the size of ADB's annual investment was only $5 billion. And last year, we did $24 billion. And then we just recently committed to ramp it up to $36 billion in 10 years. So the biggest challenge is the capacity of ourselves and then our clients and the borrowers for pipeline development, project preparation, and project implementation. So in this context of ADB, AI represents the partnership between human expertise and computational power. It's about amplifying our capability rather than just replacing our judgment. And I expect the AI to evolve as a powerful tool that makes complex information accessible and actionable, thereby enhancing ADB's effectiveness by making our investment larger, more targeted, and then more impactful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomo. And it's true that we see a lot of development in AI. And for example, DeepSeek, there are assumptions that they also use ChatGPT. So they use LLM. So that we need to also look at carefully on how it's going to develop and how they are developing. And yes, it can be turbocharged for development if it's used right, and to also understand the value that it can bring. And there are many examples in healthcare and education and even infrastructure to prevent or to identify outbreak or to identify the spending in infrastructure where it can be spent. But what is required for that is data and also digital infrastructure. Now we're going to go right into the crux of the question. So we have prepared several questions in order to be able to get some feedback from the participants. The G20 has worked to address the growing unmet financing demand for digital infrastructure in order to structure successful transactions and bring the private and public sector to increase their digital infrastructure financing. The question is addressed to Hoon from AIIB. Can you highlight some of these important characteristics drawing upon your experience of financing in the sector, please?
Yeah, so thank you. So multilateral development banks, we are already financing all types of digital infrastructure. Yeah, I mentioned the national ID system and the digital payment system, and increasingly more the data center, and using both the sovereign and non-sovereign projects. Initially, we work as a market maker, So, and now, these days, increasingly policy-based loan modality is also used to develop a conducive environment for digital infrastructure investment. And AIB worked with the G20 and produced the compendium on digital infrastructure financing. And this one identified some of the key issues, particularly for MDBs. And it's not just about financing, but what is more important is enabling environment which makes financing work. So MDB role number one is we promote engagement among various stakeholders, including government, private sector participant, and civil society when we do the digital infrastructure projects. So by fostering, promoting dialogue between these groups, MDB can help create consensus around regulatory approaches and ensure that regulations are inclusive and meet the needs of all stakeholders involved in the digital infrastructure ecosystem. And also, secondly, MDB, we are international, so we often take a lead in developing benchmarks and performance metrics to evaluate regulatory effectiveness and project success. So by comparing different countries and projects, and MDBs can help identify successful regulatory strategies and facilitate the sharing of good practices among member countries. So this knowledge transfer we found is very vital for countries looking to improve their regulatory environments. And coming to the financing structure, so tailoring financial solutions to the unique challenges of digital infrastructure can significantly enhance project viability when initially there is no commercial viability. So MDBs can provide creative financing options, as somebody mentioned, blended financing, but we have all type of project finance the modality, which leverage the money, public money, and to make it more bankable. So maybe I can share one of those examples later. So these innovative approaches will help mitigate risks and attract private investment and making projects more feasible and sustainable. So let me stop here.
Yeah, thank you, because we have a very short of time. Thomas, you were sharing that there was an AI investment potential index that has been developed and published by AFD. Can you share with us why this index is relevant both to DFIs, development financing institutions, and other stakeholders, and how is it measured and what does it represent? And again, I will be maybe more strict now on the 2 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, maybe I'll not go into the details of that work, but the idea was to give an indication to investors in AI of where the potential for AI is, but also for governments, if they want to attract investment, to improve some of the variables that actually explain further AI investment. As opposed to other indexes, sometimes an index is just based on variable, but there's no testing on the relevance. So we've done a lot of statistical work to actually check the explanatory power of each of the variables. And again, it can serve two sort of public. One is investors looking at where countries are, so if they already have talent, infrastructure. But the other potential use of that index is for a government to actually analyze its own situation and decide where it's better, where it's weak, and where it should locate its own investment. Probably, for example, to follow up with a discussion with development banks, whether multilaterals or nationals, but this is really about having a sort of a sound statement or analysis of the current situation so as to improve it.
That was short. Tomo, based on the ADB's experience and what we discussed in Manila, how can multilateral development banks and development financing institutions leverage AI and digital technologies to meet the enormous infrastructure and SDG sustainable development goals, funding gaps in developing countries? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. The infrastructure funding gap, the SDG funding gap, of course, it stems from various the factors. But one of the bottlenecks across the project cycle is that long and expensive due diligence increase transaction cost, while the capacity constraint in the government agencies and even financiers limit proper project preparation, implementation, and also monitoring. I think AI offers potential for a transformative solution by automating standardized assessment, cutting down on evaluation time, and also providing consistent implementation and monitoring capabilities. I just would like to share with all of you that ADB is currently piloting a AI-driven project due diligence platform. We call it Green Finance Digital Platform. So we leverage AI and our extensive project data and the deep domain expertise to accelerate the project due diligence while maintaining a high standard of ESG and then development effectiveness. We plan to use this platform first internally for our staff, and then make it available to our clients, government, and other partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomo. Joshua, the climate change is a global challenge for ESA. can you share with us some thoughts on ESA's posture on financing digital infrastructure and artificial intelligence so we can continue into this discussion of AI and DI financing?
ISA is a 123-member country intergovernmental organization spread across 4 regions across the world. And one of those models that was launched at the COP 2 COPs ago was the OSAWOG, the One Sun, One World, One Grid option, where the sun never sets. So across various borders, we have the power supply being exported and imported as well. So a key issue that we faced when we looked at this was in terms of procurement of materials and procurement for the various plants and equipments that we required. So ISA's stance there too has been in terms of effectively deploying and utilizing digital infrastructure and AI into the ways and means of how we procure, especially, like I said, joint procurement. Another key area that ISA intends to deploy has been the compliance part of it. When we're working across multiple geographies, multiple legislative requirements and policies, AI has come in handy in terms of being able to consider the legislation that's provided. So a key support we provide for country leaderships, member countries, is being able to tweak their legislation and acts, energy acts, in such a way that these acts are able to draw investments from internationally. So being able to put together policy support, compliance, and procurement mandates, AI is playing a crucial role and will continue to play a crucial role as far as ISA is concerned.
Thank you, Joshua. That's exactly where we wanted to go. I'm going to ask a question to all the panelists, and there was maybe you can also explain where also AFD, because I wanted to ask what is the broad view of AFD strategy when it comes to AI. But I want to ask a question to all panelists. Keep it to like 1 minute, including Mariana and the ambassador. So if you want to also step in on what has been said, would be good. In terms of what innovative financing approaches, perhaps blended finance, however you want to define it, risk-sharing mechanisms have proven most successful in financing digital infrastructure and AI. That would be the first question that I would like you to answer, but there will be a follow-up question on also how we can better attract private sector in digital infrastructure. So first, most successful example that you have in financing for AI and DI. I'm going to start with Igor, because Igor hasn't spoken yet except at the beginning.
Thank you. Well, as UNIDO, we are the specialized agency of the United Nations promoting industrial development. Basically, the work that we do is very much aligned to issues related to the SDG 9, promoting resilient infrastructure, inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and innovation. We believe digital transformation is key to enable this mission. And we have initiated a number of activities in this field. One of the most prominent one that started in 2023 is related to the Global Alliance on Artificial Intelligence. This is actually more of an association of government, academia, private sector leaders, and financial institutions that get together in order to promote a much more democratized AI adoption and adoption of more sustainable principle of the utilization of AI. Leveraging AI in promoting green industries, as well as making AI itself more sustainable in the adoption and in the promotion of itself. Within the African continent, the ISMA initiative is also another of these examples. Alliance for Industry 4.0, Smart Manufacturing in Africa, was established to unlock the potential of smart manufacturing in the continent and ensuring that Industry 4.0, so the fourth industrial revolution, if you wish, support industrial growth and job creation. At the country level, other initiatives have been taking place. Before, Professor Mazzucato mentioned about the need of promoting policy engagement. Those are other initiatives that UNIDO have been partnering with countries like Morocco, Jordan, Namibia, to promote the development and the design of AI policies that would be able to accelerate the economic trajectory of the country. In more more practical terms, other initiative that we have seen being successful has been utilizing AI in order to promote entrepreneurship and SME development. Initiative that, for example, look at more at technical assistance. As a UNIDO, we are not a bank; we are a technical agency. Therefore, our engagement in terms of deployment of investment or financial instruments is limited, oftentimes more at the level of pilot engagements, where we actually invest heavily our technical cooperation. So program designed to improve the capacity of SMEs, of innovation, or entrepreneurs to adopt tools like AI to accelerate their economic trajectory, or the development trajectory. I can stop here, and then maybe in terms of other initiatives we can discuss later.
Yes, thank you. So I'm open to also Ambassador and Mariana, if you want to step in. Yes, please.
Sure. I mean, just some comments on what's been said, because I found the conversation fascinating, but I think also a bit of not a wake-up call, because we're all awake, but how do you say, an alarm bell, because some things sound very common sense, but then if actually what's happening is the opposite, I think it's our responsibility to call it out. So I remember I was on a panel once with Eric Schmidt, who at the time was heading up Google, and Nandan Nilekani, the founder of Infosys, co-founder. And Eric Schmidt was saying that, you know, in a world where we have all these health apps, we need to rely less in some ways on health systems. And Nandan from India was saying, you must be joking. Without a health system, you know, everything else is just icing on the cake. So a bit on the cake, like the digital systems that we're saying are required to be invested in to reduce the digital divide, but also to build the necessary infrastructure. In a world where defense spending is increasing, the massive geopolitical crisis, but also given what's being discussed both at the G20 and here, in terms of the debt relief needed by nations that are spending much more in interest payments than they are in schooling, on social services, and their digital systems, I think that point that we need the systems investment, let's just yell it out very loudly, because actually what we're seeing, even in councils, by the way, in the UK that are going bankrupt, 30 councils in the United Kingdom in the so-called global north are bankrupt and overly indebted. They don't have the money to be spending on those systems. So these things are linked. Debt relief and the investments we require in these social infrastructures have to happen. And the other thing, I couldn't agree more, Joshua, on the procurement, and I obsess about this. It's why I wrote my book, Mission Economy. We would have never gotten to the moon without outcomes-oriented procurement, which solved all the different problems the astronauts had, which the solutions to those problems through procurement got us camera phones, folio blankets, baby formula, home insulation. But it seems that we only know how to use outcomes-oriented procurement for defense-related problems, and we should learn how that actually worked for our social problems. And we just published a report on water. So the global hydrological cycle is extremely unstable. It's at the heart of many wars. Nick Stern did the climate report, Das Gupta did the biodiversity one, we did the water one, and we said there's all these water problems that go way beyond the water sector that have AI/data required solutions, which are simply not happening. We're not applying the power of AI to these massive global public good problems. And there's just a need for a matching there. And we seem to be very good at doing it with military problems. We're very bad at doing it for the everyday problems that include 2 billion people not having access to safe drinking water. The AI and data solutions to that should be there, but we're not investing in that. And just super lastly, on the monopoly issue, when 70% of computing power is owned by 3 companies, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, you need to talk more to me later on why that's not a monopoly problem. And again, coming back to the icing and the cake, that's the cake. The computing power is the cake. And we can have as many cute little apps and startups as we want. When 70% of the computing power is in the hands of 3 companies, we have a problem.
Thank you. Ambassador, is there a word that you would like to step in, and then I will go back again to the panelists, and also we will select some questions in order to stay if you want to have some questions from the audience.
I just I agree with what Professor Mazzucato said. I said that in my speech, that there are very high, very potentially big gains in productivity that we can obtain thanks to the generalization of AI apps dedicated to energy, to water management, etc., etc. So no, I can only approve the fact that we obviously need to invest more, and yeah, that's it. No,
Yeah,
nothing more.
thank you. I'm going to go back to Hun. So if you want to share also the best practices that you see also at AIIB and also in order to attract private sector capital, so then we can continue into this discussion that Igor just started and continue. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have best practices in financing, but it will take time, to explain all these things. But the point is, the AI is fundamentally will be driven by private sector in any case. But for development bank, for the country, it is a digital infrastructure again, But digital infrastructure, one example I have here with me is the one satellite project in Indonesia. We finance on a PPP model, especially model with what is called the availability payment model, and we know how to make providing certain guarantee, structure it, and private sector sponsor come in. We know how to structure it, but it doesn't always work. But I mean, these things can be used. But again, the point is, when digital infrastructure is the main challenge, the backbone infrastructure, who will build it? The government will build it, Government will build it with the tax money. So this has to be done. I'm from Korea. Why Korea has become the internet a country? Because government many years ago invested heavily on this backbone infrastructure. But the other countries, do they really have that capacity? Especially now, the debt issue is a serious issue. So it is a really global issue. And we talk about, the incremental options like blended finance. That's not a solution. PPP, that's not a solution. There are bigger issues in the end. Government has to provide it. Then people like us, we will provide whole package of options to the government, from sovereign, private sector, different project finance modality. But the point is, we are worried that the digital divide will further deepen, and AI has not really created any money yet, the GDP value addition, but they are creating. And developing countries will fall further behind because they don't have digital infrastructure to start with. So I think this is the biggest. Government has to invest together with the development banks.
Thank you. Thomas, I will give you the choice so you can look at what you would like to share in terms of AFD, in terms of better attract private capital, or if you have examples of what AFD has done. But there is one that I really like, and maybe for me the most important question on data localization is, how do you build local expertise to manage AI solutions effectively? So I know it's trying to combine the different questions, but I think it's important to get your feedback on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, first, probably I'm not too concerned with attracting private capital towards the digital infrastructure, because as we have seen, including in the mobile industry, it's been mostly financed through private capital, including here on the African continent, because it was bankable, because there were customers. So I'm not sure in 10 years' time we'll do lots of loans or equity in digital infrastructure per se, because it could be taken over progressively by the private sector. However, the social infrastructure is something different. So to give you an example of something I'm proud, and actually it's not particularly innovative in terms of financial product because it's a grant, but it's a grant we've done in Senegal to help the government to deploy a teaching assistant for teachers who have to teach in French and in Halpulaar, the Pearl language. And they don't necessarily master the two languages, but here, in that case, we provided with an NGO, Libraries Without Borders, content, that is the official program of Senegal, but also digital content so that they can improve the teaching in class and the understanding of the lesson by the pupils. So this is also to illustrate at a time when ODA budget or solidarity is under severe criticism, the sort of thing that we can do and that the private market is not going to do, because there's no bankability in developing education products in the countryside in Senegal, or to train teachers, or to build schools in remote places. So this is to illustrate that something will be more easily financed by the private sector, and some will remain very hard to finance through loans or equity or any sort of hybrid capital. So this is an example of which I'm proud and I think relates to the current situation and the fact that ODA is under fire.
That's a good point. That's another discussion. Joshua, again, I'm going to ask you if you have example that you would like to share in terms of innovative financing approach or solutions to better attract private sector capital. Please share some insights on ISA's experience.
I'll probably go to an African experience we had. Again, on the blended finance front, ISA was able to design a blended finance for renewables for solar, including the first loss guarantee and all of that built into insurance premiums, built into, again, the limited digital capability at that stage. I'm talking about 2 years ago when we looked at an option. Even though it was limited, it still came in handy. It has just reinforced our need and, of course, our desire to be able to go forward with it. And this is for a company in DRC, and how we were able to look at the first loss capital and all of that we'd taken into control. So digital infrastructure put in place helped us with a pattern and the past credibility of this particular developer, and then being able to link their pattern exactly with the DFI, and being able to link them both, and also at the same time look at a small grant, and being able to look at what would bring them overboard. And we were able to do that only because we could match the pattern with our own availability of resources and also that of a DFI. That's a live example of what limited artificial AI infrastructure could do. So learning from that lesson, we've been able to move forward, to be able to explore further, develop further. There's no end to it. And it has helped us not just with risk and compliance, but also helped us to develop our business and business development as well. The organization's name is Nuru Energy from DRC. So those of you who heard of them, it's one of our success stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. It's always good also to go into details and a successful example that can be duplicated. Tomo, I'd like to ask you the same question again in terms of what would you like to share in terms of innovative financing mechanisms that you have identified at ADB, or again what you think should be done in terms of the foundations that should be in place for attracting private capital to digital infrastructure. So the feedback from ADB on that would be good. And then one quick question then to Igor, and then we will go to the audience.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the potentially useful financing modality for digital investment is a public and private partnership, because PPPs allows for risk sharing and leverage the strength of the public and then private stakeholders. And government can offer regulatory certainties, also maybe provide initial funding, while private sector technology firm bring expertise in AI, cloud infrastructure, and also ongoing innovation. But to mitigate the risk such as rent-seeking or data monopolies, I think transparent governance framework and legal safeguards are very important, particularly to cover the issues like data protection or IPs, and also the open standards. Well, the blended financing definitely could be useful, but we hear this blended financing in many areas. For example, at the G20s, many people saying that blended financing is a very useful tool to ramp up climate financing. But I think we should be mindful that blended financing cannot be a panacea, because we need a concessional money to blend with non-concessional money. Who gives that concessional money? In case of ADB, I led the negotiation of our concessional funding facility twice. basically all the donor countries becoming more and more reluctant to give us concessional funding because of the change of ODA policy or maybe fiscal constraints. I just would like to share one unique case in ADB. In 2020, we set up a venture capital fund. We call it ADV Venture, just to focus on innovative tech companies. So AI-enabled development solutions are always private sector led, and particularly by young startups. But those innovative young companies, and they often face both financial and the market risk when expanding to emerging market. So this ADB Venture not only provide the risk capital, but also leverage ADB's operational network and our market expertise to reduce market expansion risk for them. And for example, we have actually invested in some venture companies that developed a very useful AI-driven infrastructure technology, and then we're using that technology for our infrastructure project. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Tomo. Igor, one question that I wanted to ask. What are the successful models that you have seen in developing countries where AI, so to pick up on what Tomo was just saying, where AI has driven industrial growth, because that is something that I'm interested in to see what type of KPIs we are using for that.
Well, actually, this is a very good question in the sense that at the moment, if you look at the AI development, how is it going, the trajectory is taking at the moment is basically built on very common fundamental. Like the US model of AI is built on specific fundamentals that are based on which the model that we use, such as ChatGPT or even DeepSeek, are being developed. Now, the opportunities that is actually there that were discussed by Tomo in terms of investing into more AI tools that are adaptable for the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom of the economic system globally, is to basically start investing into AI models that are building on those fundamentals but are responsive to the needs of the specific countries. Ethiopia, for example, is a country that has developed and invested heavily in AI models that are applicable for the needs of the specific market they are applied to. India is another example, and China definitely is another example of those systems. Now, in response to Thomas' point of view of the private sector will be responsive to those opportunities. Well, yes, true, but not necessarily into high risk or market system that not necessarily have the ability to attract private sector investment. Therefore, the role of the development banks, that is not I understand they work on financial models that are private sector-led financial models, but the role of the development bank also is to support the needs of those countries that may not be able to attract the private investment, and they desperately need funding from development banks or public development bank to support that need. So that is probably an area that requires attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor. So now we're going to turn to the audience. So we have less than 10 minutes to get questions from the audience. So we have one hand raised. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is for Professor Mariana. Like I told you, my wife and I are always fighting about can a state be entrepreneurial. So I just want to find out the tension between state-led development and market-led innovation and investment. What is the balance that can be achieved, and what would be the causal links that actually lead to distributed success? Thank you.
Great question. So in terms of the history of innovation, the real innovations that have transformed our production systems, our distribution systems, and even our consumption systems, the public sector actually took the role, especially in the early stage, high-risk, capital-intensive phase. Unfortunately, that often doesn't happen. That doesn't mean we have entrepreneurial states. As I mentioned, we tend to have it when it's related to the military-industrial complex, and what we haven't learned globally is how to be as entrepreneurial in the regular social issues of our time. And entrepreneurialism is what we should worry about, not entrepreneurs. The state can be entrepreneurial, or it can be boring, bureaucratic, vertical. And when big companies become bureaucratic, the CEOs are asked to go talk to business schools and to rethink the organization. Even the curriculum in MBAs makes you think about value creation, decision sciences, organizational behavior, strategic management. The curriculum in the MPAs is incredibly boring, and at best you're there to fix a market failure. So this is not about romanticizing the state. It's about admitting we haven't invested in the dynamic capabilities of often our public institutions. And one of the heads of procurement in NASA, who actually helped the Apollo program get started, his name was Ernest Brackett, he said, we have to work with the private sector. There was 400,000 people in the private sector that helped NASA get to the moon and back. But he said, we're killing our brains. We're outsourcing to the private sector. We won't know how to work with them if we continue to do this. And McKinsey, by the way, came about in 1920s, and already back then they were starting to infiltrate NASA. But that was a wake-up call. He said, we will get captured. We in the public sector will get captured by brochuremanship. We will have private companies coming in with sexy brochures, now they use PowerPoints, and convince them, to work with them. What we actually need is not this, ideology of public or private. We need public-private partnerships. They need to be well-structured. Most blended finance schemes are badly structured. Blended sounds good, but it's not blended. It's often very little additionality, very low leverage, and without a clear direction. What we need is clear directionality. What are the biggest problems we have out there on water, biodiversity, digital divide? Get good partnerships, and the public side has to lead in terms of asking what the big problems are. The private sector has to help innovate towards the solutions, but what we have today is too much wimpiness in terms of lack of vision, not enough investment in the brain, and parasitic partnerships, not symbiotic partnerships.
Thank you. We're going to take another question. If there are no other questions, then we can... Yes, please.
If there is no other
You have a question for me? No, I'm kidding.
No, actually, it is matter of, in the end, it's a matter of scale, small scale, we can try all kind of innovative things. But as a development banker, we are talking about innovative, all these things, but in the end, we have to deliver in scale. I like to use an example of solar power, So the development bank actually can deliver scale working with the government. And in the initial stage of solar power, it was only government and development bank. The commercial bank don't lend, and the private sponsors. But now, after so many years, it is all private sector now. Yeah? So, that kind of incubation period, that is a good lesson for digital infrastructure. Again, I don't want to talk about AI. AI is a business. But digital infrastructure is something that government and MDBs, these are billions of dollars, We are not talking about a few $100 million. And now MDB in our portfolio, infrastructure portfolio, still digital infrastructure is, we cannot find it. Still, it's all about metro, it is all about the power transmission, increasingly more water, but there's no digital, only. And then, in the meantime, developed countries are really moving very fast. So that's what I mean. We must invest in digital infrastructure, public sector, together with MDBs, and then private sector will come.
Can I just disagree on something?
Yeah, but it's also, I think it's important, but I think I agree, and it's important to have a right balance, because then some people could say, yes, I don't have access to water or electricity, but why do we have internet? So I think but that's also what I think. But what I want is that Thomas is also raising the hand. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Hoon just said that public development banks can provide scale. They can also provide sustainability, because if you look at digital infrastructure, you can have sustainable management of typically water for data centers or decarbonized energy or not. But one thing that we can do is to make sure that because we have a long-term horizon of investment that will provide sustainability, whether it's financial, but also on a number of other aspects, such as water management, electricity management, which is typically the sort of thing that we will do and because of our procedures. So we can criticize our procedures, but they have the very important advantage of providing sustainability in that investment. Thank you.
Well, this issue of the blended financing and actually piggybacking on this conversation on the solar, on the example on the solar energy system. I mean, the European Union, for example, a way to help energy transition back at the early days of the year 2000 was basically to invest heavily with grant contribution injected into the private banking system that basically was the one that was operationalizing oftentimes the project of energy transition at the level of households. There were, at the end of the day, was the public funding that were channeled into the financial system to support and drive energy transition at the household level. Now, as you know, actually, we tested the same, very similar mechanism in a country like Somalia, where basically we utilized grant contribution, so public funding, to basically inject into private financial institutions, a private bank of Somalia, to basically reduce the cost of capital that an SME would have to be charged in the moment they were carrying out a loan on solar energy solution. So basically, at the end of the day, to reduce the cost of capital related to solar system, but also to make it more attractive to go in the direction of more renewable energy solutions. Now, this is the model that can be applied in a context like Somalia or in a context of the European Union, even bigger, where basically you leverage public funding you use public funding to leverage private funding. Now, when it comes to issues of digitalization, it's slightly different in the sense that here what we are talking about more of a infrastructure solutions rather than an individual or SME level or household level discussion. That's where basically the public good, the public need basically come into the picture. Basically, it's a matter of identifying what is a public good and what is a private related initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we have, is there a question? Yes, please. So, and then we have 1 minute, and then we do conclusions. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I think as an academic researcher and student at the University of Cape Town, I just wanted to ask, in terms of the development banks, what is the likelihood or the probability of working with public institutions such as university in terms of scalability and reinforcing the notion of bringing these digital infrastructure, so working not only with local, provincial, regional governments, but the development banks and private institutions as well, working with universities. But that's just me as a student asking.
Excellent question. So the audience, please, 1 minute reaction. Hoon, Tomo.
So this public digital infrastructure requires huge amount of public investment by the government. But then always there are competing demands. This is also the case in terms of investment in climate change, like climate adaptation. So how we can motivate the government to prioritize investment in public digital infrastructure. So we need to give them an incentive. We need to help them get the buy-in within the system. So to do so, I think there would be an excellent opportunity for partnership between, say, a national development bank who knows the political economy, who knows the policy architecture, and even academia, maybe who can help diagnostics of the benefit of investment to convince the government. And then MDB, we have money, but we also have a leverage to perhaps push the government to take some necessary policy actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomo. Hoon, any reactions?
Just quickly. So MDBs are not just financier. I mentioned we are system builder and also capacity builder and knowledge broker. But the thing is, we cannot impose. So the government has a will to do new things. I mean, of course, we have a dialogue with the government, and we have a country program, investment program, but definitely we work with the on the knowledge side with the research institution, universities, and especially like we bring one, promote also exchange of knowledge between countries also, because we are a broker, knowledge broker.
Thank you. Yeah, Joshua.
A couple of months ago, I was talking to the Prime Minister of a small island development state, a SIDS country. I asked him what his import bill was, fuel import bill. He was saying something to the tune of about 38% of their budget went into that. And I said that this was basically looking at infrastructure and AI being put into the infrastructure to be able to look at the economies and what they were importing and what. And so if 38 to 40% of the budget went into dirty fuel, and I said, where could you potentially look at minimizing this cost? And he had absolutely no pattern to fall back on. So I said, and then he says compliance, and of course he was talking about law and legislation. I said, one of the key reasons, and he was also scared about, he had nervousness about how this would be used or misused, or unless he was giving me lame excuses for not digitalizing. So I said, actually, it was the other way around. If you did have digital infrastructure, it provided you with some key points to be able to monitor the development performance of your legislation and how this legislation is effective or not effective, how your Solicitor General's office and the lawyers there are working in terms of how they are predicting the outcomes of what could come out of the legislation. So in so many ways, it's an incentive for governments to be able to adopt that. And it's not just a handout when we help a member country, but you're helping them for long and on a long-term basis.
Thank you, Joshua. So we're coming at the end, and I saw another question, but we don't have time, sorry, but you can go and ask the panelists, no problem. So I'm going to ask, so we are 6, including me, 7, so we have 1 minute each to close the session. Ladies first, Professor.
Well, first of all, thank you. Great questions and great conversation. But just also to pick up on that last question, maybe it's a closing point, it's really important to have this notion of collective intelligence that people often talk about. We need it to be distributed. And currently the talent pools around AI are increasingly concentrated. That's what I meant when I talked about algorithmic rents. And when we heard that tax revenue should be used to pay for digital infrastructure, those 3 companies that I mentioned that have 70% of the computing power pay hardly any tax. We know that. You know, I'm not telling you that. All the papers talk about that as well. So it's a big moment to think about this issue of rents and what it actually means to tackle it in terms of the knowledge creation. And universities have been historically key players in knowledge creation, but when these rents are being used to pay huge salaries, siphoning off the talent from universities to go into a few companies, we have a problem. So it was a great question. Thank you.
Excellent. Tomo?
Yeah, again on the financing. So, financing DPI relies on various the models, including government-led initiatives, industry consortia, transaction, fee-based system. So, but the problem is these approaches often lack alignment with AI-driven infrastructure needs, which requires long-term and flexible funding mechanisms. So, perhaps one of the most impactful policy change would be to establish a dedicated multi-year funding streams through blended public and private finance that address the full life cycle cost of AI-driven digital infrastructure. So instead of just funding the initial setup, this strategy would ensure that operational, maintenance, and upgrade expenses are continuously supported, and thereby accelerating digital transformation by preserving the system interoperability and also security. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomo. Thomas?
Maybe also coming back to the last question, I think you need to convince your governments that it needs to invest in your talent, because talent can move. So it might be a risky investment for a government to invest in people if they think they're going to move abroad in that discussion between concentration and deconcentration. So I think probably there's almost a political debate in each and every country, whereas talent and startups and economy is going to develop locally, or if it's going to move abroad, because that might be really a deterrence to invest in a particular country if talent data tend to flow elsewhere. So I think that discussion is not entirely behind us. Thank you.
Igor?
Well, having a policy is probably a starting point. It was mentioned also before in the keynote presentation. AI and digital infrastructure hold an immense potential, this is clear, but without a policy that set the direction, or without a policy that identify what are the potentials of growth, what are the directions that have to be invested on and in terms of infrastructure, in terms of skills development, in terms of the role of the academia, the role of the private banks, the role of the public banks, is actually going to risk that the divide, as I mentioned earlier, might actually become even worse. Policy of whether it is a global or a country level or a regional bloc could actually mitigate some of the negative externalities that a wrong direction of growth of the AI can actually bring. But we need to see AI as a potential growth, a positive externality, as a potential for positive growth and more inclusive intersectionality. So thank you, and it was a great pleasure to participate in this conversation.
Thank you, Igor. Joshua?
I mean, in just short and all that I have said, for any organization, while AI is deployed, it reduces risk, it reduces delays, and of course it increases efficiency, reduces anomalies, which means it increases accountability as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention was it increases insight into this whole business, which means it also provides increased oversight in being able to oversee the systems and the efficiency of systems and the personnel involved.
Thank you. Hun?
Actually, it is quite shocking the pace of AI these days in US and now in China also, you know. So this is really shocking. It is redefining the way people work and how the economy works. We don't know what will happen. So this is really transformational. So I believe for emerging economies, next 3 to 5 years, 1 to 5 years, we cannot really lose time to really scaling up the foundational digital infrastructure, particular focus on broadband networks and cloud infrastructure and data centers, public, private, whatever available, but government really has to have a long-term plan to work with the MDBs we build something next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. Moderator, I can also close, is that my last message, what I would focus on is if we want to have AI is also quality data. And what we are working with governments is when we look at some countries, they have 16,000 apps in the government. Information doesn't flow between line ministries. Systematic data collection, harmonized processes, interoperability are really key. And what was discussed is insourcing the government. So everything we can do to insource the government and support government is exactly what we should do. Thank you very much. A round of applause for the super speakers. Thank you.